In this conflict there was no sign of battle given, because it was done by the rashness of a soldier, bastard of a bastard of the house of Boissy, who without expecting the command of the general, went alone upon the Breche, and after he had, transcriber's note, the text is illegible here with 1 to 2 words missing, against the enemies, drew his sword, and did fight a great while hand to hand without being wounded. Some of his companions seeing his valor, did follow him, and others came to their help, and these carried along with them all those that were appointed to give the assault, insomuch that by a kind of warlike emulation, all did carry themselves so valiantly, that after a long and stout resistance, they routed the enemies, and put all the garrisons to the sword. It is what the author saith in the 1st and 2nd verse, seeing that those that were appointed to give battle, every one in his regiment or squadron, were compelled by emulation to come out of their park, that is, from the precinct of place wherein they were. The 3rd verse addeth, that round about the ensign of Gasp shall be known, that is, in the assault the captain of that place, named Gasper Pagan, was remarked to fight valiantly everywhere the French did assault, which the Marshal of Brissac seeing, as also the forwardness of his men commanded the general assault to be given. The captain seeing the town taken, though he had above 20 wounds, for marks of his valor, yet by that despair threw himself into a well, near which the marshal passing, heard his voice, and caused him to be drawn out, and cured of his wounds. This captain being resolved to perish in this assault, did cause all his own to be put to death, as the 4th verse saith. The history of this town was famous, for which the Marshal of Brissac did present gifts to the most valiant, and among the rest to this bastard, after he had put him in jeopardy of his life, for having violated the military orders in a matter of such concernment. That town of Vignal is situated upon a mountain of the Country of Montserrat, of a difficult access, where no pieces of ordnance can be brought up, but by the help of men's arms. After the taking of it, the marshal did cause it to be razed even to the ground, because it could not be useful to the French, that had many other places to keep, and might have been very beneficial to the Spaniard. English. The natural to sow high, high not low, the late return shall make the sad contented, the recloying shall not be without strife, in employing and loosing all his time. Not. The recloying, being a forged word, without signification, and being the key of all this stanza, nobody can tell what to make of it. English. The old tribune, at the point of the trahemide, shall be much entreated not to deliver the captain, they will not will, the ill-speaking fearful, by legitimate shall deliver to his friends. Not. The old tribune is an old captain or governor of a town, who shall be much entreated not to deliver at the end of the trahemide, that is, 3 months, one that he kept prisoner, but will they or not, he shall lawfully deliver him to his friends. English. As a griffin shall come the king of Europe, accompanied with those of the north, of red and white shall conduct a great troop, and they shall go against the king of Babylon. Not. This is concerning the king of Switzerland, Gustavus Adolphus, who is called here the king of Europe, because he lived in a part of it, and because he was one, if not the most gallant prince of his time, who with a great army of his subjects, named here those of Aquilan, invaded Germany, and made war against the emperor, whom he calleth here the king of Babylon, either because he is a great favourer of the Roman Church, or because the empire, by reason of so many sovereign princes in it, is like a Babel and confusion. The great troop of red and white were his own soldiers, whom he distinguished by their several habits, clothing them with several colors, to breed an emulation among them, there being the red regiment, the white, the blue, the yellow, the green, and English. A great king shall land by Nice, the great empire of death shall interpose with it. He shall put his mare in the antipodes, by sea all the pillage shall vanish. Not. A great king shall land hard by Nice, which is a sea town in Savoy, but he shall have a great loss of his men by death, and the sea shall swallow all his plunder. English. Foot and horse upon the second watch shall come in destroying all by sea, they shall come into the harbour of Marseilles, tears, cries and blood, never was so bitter a time. Not. This is so clear that it needeth no interpretation. English. The walls shall be turned from brick into marble, there shall be peace for 57 years, joy to mankind, the aqueduct shall be built again, health, abundance of fruit, joy and mellifluous time. Not. After so many calamities prognosticated by the author, he promiseth here 57 years of a golden age, but when? He mocketh no mention. English. The inhumane tyrant shall die 100 times, in his place shall be put a learned and mild man, all the senate shall be at his command, he shall be made angry by a rash malicious person. Not. This prognostication is easy to be understood, only it is indeterminate, and specifieth neither time nor persons. English. The Roman clergy in the year 1609, in the beginning of the year shall make choice of a grey and black, come out of the country, such a one as never a worse was. Not. Wanting the chronology of the popes, I have not set down who that pope was, than whom our author saith there never was a worse, but the time being so punctually prefixed, it will be an easy matter for the reader to find out satisfaction in this point. English. The child shall be killed before the father's eyes, the father after shall enter into ropes of rushes, the people of Geneva shall notably stir themselves, the chief lying in the middle like a log. Not. This prophecy is twofold. The 2 first verses foretell of a man that shall have his son killed before his eyes, and himself afterward shall be strangled by a rope made of rushes. The 2 last verses are concerning the people of Geneva, who, as he saith, shall lustily bestir themselves, while their captain, chief, or commander shall carelessly lie like a log. English. The new ship shall make journeys into the place, and thereby where they shall translate the empire, Beaucaire, Alls, shall keep the hostages, near them shall be found 2 columns of porphyry. Not. This prophecy is concerning 3 things. The first is of a considerable new ship, that shall sail several times into a place where the empire shall be translated. The second is concerning 2 towns of Languedoc, Beaucaire, and Alls, who shall not surrender the hostages that they had. The third is concerning 2 columns of porphyry that shall be found thereabout. English. From Nimes, d'Arles and Vienna contempt, they shall not obey the Spanish proclamation, to the Labourés for to condemn the Great One, 6 escaped in a seraphical habit. Not. It seemeth that those 3 aforenamed towns will refuse to obey a Spanish proclamation, that would compel them to condemn a great man. As for Labourés, it is a barbarous and nonsensical word. The last verse signifieth that 6 shall escape, clothed in Franciscan habits, called here seraphical, because the Franciscans believed that a seraphine did appear to Saint Francis their patron, from whence their order is called by many the seraphical order. English. A most potent king shall come into Spain, who by sea and land shall make great conquests towards the south. This evil shall beat down the horns of the new moon, and slack the wings of those of Friday. Not. A great and potent king shall come out of Spain, who by sea and land shall make great conquest towards the south, that is Barbary, which shall be a great prejudice to the Turkish Empire, who hath for his arms a new moon, and slack the wings of those of Friday, that is, of the Turks, because they keep the Friday for their Sabbath. This prophecy was fulfilled by Philip II, King of Spain, who drove away all the Moors out of the south part of it, and took a great many places in the coasts of Barbary. English. Religion of the name of the sea shall come, against the sect sun adaluncative, obstinate sect deplorat shall be afraid, of the 2 wounded by Aleph and Aleph. Not. I confess my ignorance in the intelligence of this stanza. English. Triremes full of captives of all age. Time good for evil, the sweet for bitter, pray to the barbarian, they shall be too hasty, desirous to see the feather complain in the wind. Not. Triremes are galleys, with 3 benches of oars, the rest is much of the nature of the former. English. The clear splendor of the merry maid shall shine no more, she shall be a great while without salt, with merchants, ruffians, wolves, odious, all promiscuously, she shall be an universal monster. Not. This is concerning a famous beauty, who in her latter age shall prostitute herself to all comers. English. At last the wolf, the lion, ox and assy, fearful doe, shall be with the mastiffs, the sweet manna shall no more fall to them, there shall be no more watching and keeping of mastiffs. Not. This is a prognostication of a general peace all Europe over. The sweet manna shall no more fall to them, signifieth that the Europeans shall be fed no more with manna, as the Jews were in the desert, but shall pass to the land of promise, that is of peace and quietness. English. The great empire shall be in England, the Pemberton for more than 300 years, great armies shall pass through sea and land, the Portugueses shall not be contented therewith. Not. This is a favorable one for England, for by it the empire, or the greatest dominion of Europe is promised to it, for the space of above 300 years, at which the Portugueses or Spaniards shall much repine. Century 11. English. Maisonnier, Manti, and the third that shall come, plague a new attempt shall trouble them enclosed, the fury of it shall bite in Aix, and the places thereabout, then they of Fosons shall come and double their misery. Not. These are names of particular persons that are here threatened of the plague, as also the city of Aix capital of province, and the Count Ray about it, and after that the city of Marseilles named here Fosons, because they are a colony of the old Fosonses in Greece. English. By Villefranche, Mascon shall be put in disorder, in the faggots shall soldiers be hidden, the time shall change in prime for the king, by Chalon and Moulins they shall be all hewed to pieces. Not. Villefranche is a town 5 leagues from Lyon, and Mascon another about the same distance from Villefranche, and Chalon from Mascon, and Moulins from Chalon. The meaning of it is this, that there shall be an attempt from Villefranche upon Mascon, by soldiers hidden in faggots, that shall be cut off by the succours of those Chalons and Moulins, which like did happen in the time of the civil wars in France, between the king and the League, when the towns stood one against another, but because I can find nothing of it in the history, I suspend my further judgment therein. Century 12. English. Fire, flame, hunger, theft, wild smoke, shall cause to fail, bruising hard, to move faith, Son of God. All province swallowed up? Driven from the kingdom, raging mad, without spitting. Not. The curiosity of the author in striving to begin all his words, in the 2 first verses hath made the tense of this stanza so obscure, that I believe no body ever did or shall truly understand it. All what can be gathered out of it, is great threatening of several calamities, that were to happen upon Provence his native Count Ray, as it did a little while after his death, by the civil wars for religion. English. The great succours that came from Gascony shall stop hard by Poitiers, Lyon surrendered by Montleuil and Vienna, and ransacked by all kinds of tradesmen. Not. The words and sense of this are plain. English. A cruel assault is preparing in Cyprus, tears in my eye, thou art near thy ruin, the fleet of Constantinople and the Moric, so great damage. 2 difference the great wast shall be by the rock. Not. A cruel assault is preparing, signifies the shortness of the time in which it was to happen, for our author prophesied 1555. And Cyprus was taken by the Turks in the month of August 1571. Selamis II. 5th Emperor of the Turks, where the perfidiousness of the Bassa Mustafa that besieged it is remarkable, for having the town delivered him upon articles, first, that the inhabitants of the city yet alive should enjoy their lives, liberty, and goods, with free exercise of Christian religion, that the governor Bragadinus with the rest of the captains and soldiers might in safety depart with bag and baggage, and at their departure take with them 5 pieces of ordnance, and 3 horses, whichsoever it should please them to make choice of, and that the Turks should safely conduct them into Crete, finding them both victual and shipping, yet all these matters agreed upon, and commenced into writing, as also by solemn oaths on both sides confirmed, the perfidious Bassa nevertheless caused Bragadinus to have his ears cut off, then caused him to be set in a chair, and his skin to be flain off from him quick, his head to be cut from his dead body, and upon the point of a spear to be set upon a high place, his skin also stuffed with chaff, he caused to be hanged up at the yard's arm, and so to be carried about. English. 2 bodies, 1 head, fields divided into 2, and then answer to 4 unheard ones, small for great ones, open evil for them, the tower of eggs beaten by lightning, worse for Eusoves. Not. Out of this crab-bit stanza we shall pick what we can, and leave the rest to the judgment of the judicious reader. First, the two bodies, one head may be understood either a monster that was so, as it did happen once in Italy, as Parius witnesseth, or of the union of the two kingdoms of France and Navarre under Henry IV, or of England and Scotland under King James. The Tower of Aiguemortes was struck in with the lightning, a while after our author had put out his prophecies. English. Sad counsels, unfaithful, malicious, ill advice, the law shall be betrayed, the people shall be moved, wild and quarrelsome, both in country and city the peace shall be hated. Not. This is plain. English. King against king, and duke against a prince, hatred between them, horrid dissension, rage and fury shall be in every province, great war in France, and horrid changes. Not. This is a true picture of the miseries of the civil wars in France, when Charles IX, King of France, was against Henry King of Navarre, and the Duke of Guise against the Prince of Condé. English. The agreement and contract shall be broken in pieces, the friendships polluted by discord, the hatred shall be old, all faith corrupted, and hope also, Marseilles without concord. Not. This is a second part of the foregoing. English. War and strifes, at Blois war and tumult, several lying in wait, acknowledgment unexpected, they shall get into the Chasteau Trompette by assault, and into the Chasteau du Ha, who shall be guilty of it. Not. This prophecy is concerning the civil wars of France, between the king and the League. He saith, at Blois war and tumult, because the Duke of Guise, and the Cardinal his brother were both killed there, at the Convention of Estates by the king's command, which he calleth here acknowledgment unexpected, because the kingdom did own the fact. The last two verses are concerning the two castles or fortresses of Bordeaux, who in those days were sometimes by one party, and sometimes by another. English. He shall by fury compel them to hold out, every heart shall tremble, Langon shall have a terrible event, the kick shall return to the 1,000 kicks, Gironde. Garin. Are no more horrid. Not. The two last verses seem to have a relation to the foregoing stanza, and to import that the governor of Bordeaux shall compel them to hold out, and because Langon, a town 20 or 30 miles distant from Bordeaux, was of the contrary party, and did annoy sometimes those of Bordeaux, it is threatened here to have 1,000 kicks for one. Gironde and Garonne are the two rivers of Bordeaux. English. Iova's near, yet seemeth to be far from the Lake Leman, very great preparatives, return confusion, far from the neveu of the late great Suppleman, all of their train. Not. This is a notable one, directly foretelling the enterprise or scalado made by the Duke of Savoy, upon Geneva, for the better intelligence of which, we shall first give the sense word for word, and then set down the whole history as a piece of cabinet, that the reader, after so much tedious and crabbed reading, may have some field to spatiate and recruit itself. Iova's near, Iova's by anagram is Savoy, or the Duke of it, who at that time was near Geneva, yet seemeth far from the Lake Leman, which is the lake that passeth through Geneva, called in Latine Lacus Lemanus. Very great preparatives, because at that time he made great preparations to scale the walls of Geneva. Return, because he was forced to retire. Confusion, because he was confounded in his undertaking. Far from the neveu of the great Suppleman, that is, an action much unworthy the kindred of Henry IV. Called here great Suppleman, to whom he was allied. All of their train, that is, all that were with him in that undertaking, did partake of his return and confusion. Now the history is thus. About the latter end of the year 1600. The Duke of Savoy, having done before all his endeavours to take the city of Geneva by force, did resolve at last to have it by craft and stratagem. He did frame a design full of courage, understanding, and conduct, as well as of misfortune. It was long a hatching without being discovered, and although it was known that he caused ladders to be made, and that he bought everywhere men of courage and resolution, and had a great number of them already at Chambéry, well paid and maintained, waiting for the ripeness of the design, though ignorant of it. Nobody could believe that it was against those of Geneva, because at that time he did treat with them of the manner of living friendly, and of the liberty of trade, having sent to them for this purpose a few days before the President Richet, to treat and advise of a manner of living friendly together, for the ease of the people. They did so much hearten and relish his propositions and promises, that although cities of such condition do not lightly believe them that have been their enemies, nevertheless they trusted to that, and grew careless of their own preservation, thinking that there was nothing more powerful for their security than the treaties of peace between France, Spain, and Savoy, in which they thought themselves included, under the name of the Confederate, with the cantons of Switzerland, insomuch that the Duke's subjects went thither so familiarly, that the day before this execution some gentlemen that knew something of the design, being come into the town to buy some horses, said they would come again the next day to conclude the bargain, and others had kept she same language for other wares, so fully persuaded were they of a success, though heaven, who laugheth at the thoughts of the proud, had resolved to humble and abase them. The governor of Lyon had presently noticed that the Duke of Savoy was coming on the side of the mountain, and carried with him scaling ladders, of which he sent notice to the king, and provided what was necessary for the defence of Lyon. Although the same advice said it was not for France, yet all this could not hinder the execution which was in the meantime a-doing. D'Albigny, lieutenant general of the Duke in those countries he had on this side of the mountains, had made the troops to pass, and for that purpose had assigned them of their quarters in the towns of Geneva, in several places, that they might not be so soon discovered. The rendezvous was at a place called Chambéry. The time of the execution was reserved to the prudence of the leader. The time was not according to the precept of the Parthians, who ever fought by night, nor of the Lacedaemonians, who undertook nothing but in the time of the full moon, for it was one of the darkest and longest nights of all the year. The troops began their march about 6 of the clock. Brignolles, governor of Bonds, a small town in Faucigny, distant 3 leagues from Geneva, was the man that had contributed most of his own for the performance of this design, whom he thought so certain, that he said he would die to the world, if he did not live in Geneva. D'Albigny had set up watches upon all the passes, to stop all travellers, for fear notice should be given of their coming, and of that of the Duke of Savoy, to whom the execution had been represented so sure and certain, in that he should be there himself to reap the honour and profit of it, and to end the triumph that his grandfather had begun. He came over the mountains with 5 gentlemen only in his company, and the same day came to Tremblers, a village distant from Geneva about 3 miles, and for all that they could not hinder, but an unknown trooper did ride as far as the New Gate, and asked to speak to him that commanded there, bidding him look to themselves, because the Duke of Savoy wished them no good, and so retreated galloping. This news was brought to Blondel, the 4th syndic of the town, and who had the charge of the guard that year. He answered, he would provide for that. Another came afterwards, and told him that the Duke's forces were about the town, but knew not upon what design, and that himself was at Bonn. He answered, that they were not birds, and could not fly. Mistrust does not always be commended, but too much confidence in such business is exceedingly dangerous. Those that were to do the execution, and to get up first upon the ladders, went along by the river of Alba, that the noise of the waters might hinder the sentinels to hear them. 2 things did happen, that were an ill omen for them. They saw in the skies unusual fires, a hare did many times cross their way, and gave them a false alarm, and as many things being considered in the night time, do trouble the imagination, and that fear mocketh one think that bushes are squadrons, and thistles pikes, as it did happen once at the siege of Paris, by the Burgundians. They did discover about 11 of the clock some posts, to whom the clothworkers of Geneva used to nail their stuffs to dry them. Those that went foremost would have charged them, thinking they had been in ambuscado. From thence they went all along the rows to the meadow of Plainpillet. Brignolet, and those that were ordained for the Scaleto followed D'Albigny, who led them down into the town ditch, on the side of the Quartieri, without being discovered by the sentinels, although the ducks that were in the ditch did, for to awake those of Geneva, what the geese did at Rome against the French. They went over the ditch upon hurdles for fear to sink in the mire, and did set up 3 ladders of a wonderful invention, because they could be easily carried upon mules, and they could be folded into so many pieces, that they could reach the highest wall that is, and besides that, so strong and firm, that no ladder of 1 piece could be more. They had besides that provided hatchets, hammers, pincers, and other such tools, to cut iron chains, break locks, draw nails and bars. They had besides several petardos and petardo masters. Fortune, who hath a great power in such undertakings, did fail them in their need, after she had brought them to the middle of the city, and made them masters of the streets for above 2 hours. By one of those ladders went up about 200 men. Brignolet was the first, followed by Diotignac and Sonus, and did carry himself more valiantly and prudently. Having got over the wall, he surprised the sentinel, and drew from him the watchword, and his life, then threw him over into the ditch, and stood in his place to stay for the round, that he might do as much to him, as he did when it came near him to give him the watchword. D'Albigny, and one Father Alexander a Scotchman, and a Jesuit, were at the ladder's foot, encouraging those that went up. The boy that carried the lantern saved himself, and gave notice to the court de garde of what had befallen his master, at which the court de garde was not much moved. This was a doing between 1 and 2 of the clock, expecting that of 4, at the which they had proposed to make their greater attempt, and in the meanwhile to give time to the succor to draw near, and to the day to break, because all warlike executions done by night carry always some confusion with them. No body had gone to bed in the town with a thought to be awakened so soon. They rested upon the assurance of the peace. The undertakers had a whole hour's time to get up, and as much before they met with any opposition. If D'Albigny had been within to husband that time better than did Sonus, Brignolet, and Diotignac, they might have cried, "The town is won." About half an hour past 2 of the clock, a sentinel that was in the Mint's tower, having heard some noise in the ditch, shot off his gun to give the alarm, which compelled Brignolet to discover himself, charging all that was in the court de garde of the Newgate, that he might plant the petard, and make way for the main body that was in plain Palais. They got very well the court de garde, but against the rule of war, which commandeth to kill all, they let one escape that had so much wit as to get up, and to let down the portcullis, to frustrate the effect of the petard. The town was at that time full of cries and horrid howlings, of which the Savoyards should have made their profit, and increased their courage, as it did weaken that of the townsmen, that knew not where to run, some crying one way, some another. The undertakers lost themselves in the appearance of so happy a success. Those that were without should have given the alarm at some other gate, to divide the forces of the town. Those that were within made no use of their hatchets, hammers and pincers. They forgot to set some houses on fire. The spirit of astonishment seized upon them, having in their thoughts the sack and plunder of the town, more than the perfection of their conquest. They made only use of a certain croaking like frogs, as the Turks use the bret, to animate and rally themselves. Brignolet, being compelled to discover himself, marched towards the new gate, distant from that place about 200 paces, and there was wounded, and died a little after. The fight began in the dark, and the court de garde was dispersed. One soldier, hearing them call for the petard, got upon the gate, and cut the rope that held the portcullis, and shut up the petard between the portcullis and the gate, which they went about to break open, with their hatchets and hammers. At the first resistance the petard's master was killed. The order is such at Geneva, that in all extraordinary accidents every citizen knoweth the place of his rendezvous, and there goeth with his arms, and the town-house is never destitute of soldiers. In the meantime the magistrate crieth, "He that loveth me, let him follow me." Some country fellows of the neighbouring towns, who kept their watch by turns, being led by some captains and citizens, did present themselves at the new gate, where they were stoutly received, and beaten back, and yet the first shot of theirs killed the petard master, who was much troubled with his tools. This first charge would not have driven them back, if the body of the citizens had not come, and charged them so furiously, that they lost all their courage. Necessity, which strengthens even those that want courage, did so animate the citizens to their defence, that the undertakers were fain to give back. The more nimble went again to their ladders, which proved useless, because the cannon that was planted in the fort of Loy, near the ditch, had broken them, so that they left 54 dead upon the place, and upon the curtain of the quarriere, and 13 that were taken alive. If the town had had soldiers in readiness to make a sally in that endabatism, the night being sometimes favourable to such expeditions, those that were at Plain Palais would not have retreated in so good an order. There were 13 taken alive, among whom were the Baron of Attignac, the Lord Sonus, the Lord Chaffardin, upon promise of their lives, and to be prisoners of war, or else they had preserved an honourable death to all the promises, to be spared in laying down their arms. Among them was Diotignac, who fought valiantly, and gave his order of Saint Maurice to his man, bidding him save himself, being resolved to die with his sword in his hand. The lords of Geneva would not use them as prisoners of war, but as thieves and robbers come into the city over the walls. They said that the Duke was too generous a prince for so wicked and perfidious an action. There were several opinions concerning their sentence of death. The more moderate would have them be put to ransom, others would have them be kept prisoners, that they might serve for exchange, if some of the town were taken in the continuation of the war. But the more violent did stir the people, in representing unto them the loss of their religion, the ravishing of their wives and maids, the massacre, the sack and plunder of the town, and their perpetual slavery, and the complaints of the widows and children of those that had been killed, were so much considered, that the more moderate opinions did not appear unjust, but in how much they tended to death. They were condemned to be hanged, which is thought the most ignominious death. They desired to have their heads cut off as gentlemen, which was granted, but it was after they were hanged. 59 were found killed and wounded, who had all their heads cut off. In the ditch there were some arms found, 30 dead, and 4 wounded, all their heads were cut off, and set with the rest upon the gallows. Of the citizens of the town there were 17 found dead, most of them killed by their companions in the dark. Their names were John Canal, one of the lords of the council, Louis Baudière, John Bandel, Louis Gallatin, Peter Cabriel, Marc Cambiagua, Nicolas Bogaret, James Mercier, Abraham de Baptista, Daniel Humbert, Martin de Bioello, Michael Menard, Philip Potter, Francis Baucel, John Bignett, James Petit, Gerard Miazy, and about 20 wounded. The Sunday after dinner, about 2 of the clock, 67 heads, as well of those that were killed, as of those that were hanged, were fastened upon the gallows, and the bodies thrown into the Rhône. The next Tuesday there was a solemn fasting day kept, and they began to publish everywhere the wonders of this deliverance. Here followeth the copy of their letter, to the Governor of Lyon. My lord, you have known before this by many of your letters, how His Highness of Savoy, notwithstanding he knew, and had confessed that we were included in the peace made in the year 1600. Between His Royal Majesty of France and him, hath nevertheless divers times oppressed us, by detaining our rents, prohibiting of trade, other violences and extortions, refusing to hearken to the just and pressing remonstrances, which His Majesty hath made him several times in our behalf, but hath also contrived many designs to surprise us in time of peace. Now it is so, that for the encompassing his pernicious design, the Lord d'Albigny, Saturday last, the 11th of this month, did bring before our town, on the side of Plainpalais, about 2,000 men, horse and foot, all choice men, and hath caused to pass about 200 of them over our ditch, by the Corritary, and having set up ladders one within another, hath caused them to come into our town, about 3 of the clock in the morning, upon Sunday the 12th of this month, encouraging them himself, being in the ditch, so that being come down into the town, some went towards our new gate to force it open, and give entrance to their companions, who were in the plain of Plainpalais. Others went towards the Mint gate, that they might by this means come into the middle of the town. But it hath pleased God to look upon us with His favorable eye, and to give such a heart to the citizens, that they beat them back, and killed the best part of them taken upon the place, the rest hath been taken, and since that hanged by our order, the rest threw themselves down from the wall, so that we hear, many of them are either dead or grievously wounded. It is a wonderful deliverance of our God, for which we are particularly bound to praise Him. But as it is probable that the said Lord d'Albigny will continue his ill designs, by so much the more that we hear His Highness is not far from us, we do entreat and request by all our affection, that you would be pleased to consider what prejudice the taking of this place would be to His Majesty, and to continue us your favor, and assist us with your wise and prudent advice, and see. Many did judge of the success of this enterprise by the beginning, and were more forward to write than to perform well. The king had noticed that the Duke was master of the town, and the manner of doing was represented with so much felicity and facility, that there was less reason to doubt of it than believe it. The truth was not known, but by the advice of the Governor of Lyon, which came before any discourse that the town did publish after its deliverance, the Duke went post back again over the mountains, and left his troops within 3 miles of Geneva in 3 places, at Tournon, Faucigny, and Ternier. He caused his ambassadors to say to the Lord of Bern, that he had not made that enterprise to trouble the peace of the cantons, but to prevent Elestiguiers to seize upon it for the King of France, who should have been so powerful a neighbor, as would have given them great occasion of fears and jealousies. The success of this undertaking made it appear that God will not have those treaties to the assurance of which his name hath been called for a witness, to be violated, whatsoever appearance or pretext of religion there be. Thus, gentle reader, thou sayest, by all these circumstances, the truth of our author's prognostication. English. Brooks and rivers shall be a stopping to evil, the old flame of anger being not yet ceased, shall run through France, take this as an oracle, houses, manors, palaces, sect shall be razed. Not. This hath a perfect relation to the miseries that followed the general massacre of the Protestants in France in the year 1572. When the rivers were a stop to the cruelty of the persecutors, and when so many houses, manors and palaces belonging to those of the Reformed religion were demolished, and to signify the certainty thereof, he saith in the 3rd verse, take this as an oracle. To the curious reader, gentle reader, thou shalt take notice, that in this place the covetousness of booksellers and printers hath in the modern copies vented new prophecies, which they call prognostications, drawn out of those of Michael Nostradamus, which are so absurd and nonsensical, that they have been rejected, both by his son, and the best wits of this age. Therefore I would not soil the paper with them, for fear to put such a coarse list upon so fine a cloth, but shall proceed on to give you the rest of those prophecies, which truly and undoubtedly belong to our author. Wonderful prognostications for the age 1600. Gathered out of the notes of Mr. Michael Nostradamus, physician to King Charles IX, and one of the most excellent astronomers that ever were. Presented to the most victorious and merciful Prince Henry IV, King of France and Navarre, at Chantilly, the Constable of Montmorency's house, the 19th of March 1605. By Vincent Seve of the town of Beaucaire in Languedoc. To the King. Sir, having some years ago recovered certain prophecies, or prognostications, made by the lately deceased Michael Nostradamus, from the hands of Henry Nostradamus's nephew, which he gave me before his death, and which I have kept secret till now, that I saw they treated of the affairs of your estate, and particularly of your person and successors, as yourself may see if you please to take the pains to look upon, and wherein you shall find things worthy of admiration. I have taken the boldness, though unworthy, to present them to you, transcribed in this little book, no less wonderful than the other two which he made, for in it he hath treated of what shall happen in this age 1600. Not so obscurely as he hath done formerly, but by enigmes, specifying so clearly the things he speaketh of, that one may certainly judge of them, as of things that are already come to pass. Being therefore desirous that your majesty should have the first notice thereof, I thought to discharge my duty in this as one of your most obedient and faithful subjects, which I entreat your majesty would be pleased to agree, obliging so not only the body of one of your faithful subjects already yours, but also the soul who shall continue to pray for the health and prosperity of your majesty, and of all those that have relation to it, as one that is, and shall ever be, Sir, your most humble, most obedient and faithful servant and subject, Seve. From your town of Beaucaire in Languedoc. English. New age, new alliance, a marquedom put into a boat, who shall be the strongest of the two to carry it, of a duke or of a king, galley of Florence, Indiana the port of Marseilles, a maid in France, of the Fort Catherine the head shall be demolished. Not. By new age is meant the age 1600. To the end of the century, each age containing 100 years. The new alliance was the match between Henry IV and Catherine of Medicis, made and celebrated that year. A marquedom put into a boat was the marquedom of Saluces in Italy, which the Duke of Savoy had surreptitiously taken from the crown of France, in the time of the civil wars, and would not restore it, for which there was great wars between the King of France and the Duke of Savoy, till at last they agreed that the Duke of Savoy should give in exchange of it the Count Ray of Brescia, and this is the sense of the 2nd, 3rd, and half the 4th verse. Galley of Florence in the port of Marseilles, a maid in France, signifieth the arrival of Mary of Medicis in the galleys of France, and her landing in the port of Marseilles. Of the Fort Catherine the head shall be demolished, the Duke of Savoy to plague and bridle those of Geneva, upon whom he hath had always pretensions, had built a strong fort 2 leagues from Geneva, called the Fort St. Catherine, which did so annoy the town, that they made their addresses to Henry IV, who was then in war with the Duke of Savoy, representing to him that they were not able to relieve his army with victuals, because of the said fort, whereupon Henry IV took it, and demolished it to the ground. English. How much gold and silver shall be spent, when Earl shall go about to take a town, so many thousands and thousands of soldiers, killed, drowned, without doing anything, in a stronger he shall put his foot on ground, a pygmy helped by the Centaurs. Not. This stanza and the next are concerning the town of Ostend, which was besieged by the Archduke, and defended by the States of Holland, under the conduct of Earl Maurice of Nassau. In a stronger he shall put his foot on ground, signifieth that Earl Maurice during the said siege, took the Sluis another town of the Spaniards, thought stronger than Ostend. A pygmy helped by the Centaurs, signifieth that Prince Maurice, whom ye calleth here a pygmy in comparison of the Archduke, was helped by the French and English, whom ye calleth here Centaurs, to rhyme with the word soldats in the foregoing verse. English. The town shall be upside down, overthrown by 1,000 shot of cannons, and forts underground, shall hold 5 years, all shall be returned, and surrendered to the enemies, water after that shall make war against them. Not. This stanza is as well as the former concerning the town of Ostend, which after 3 years' siege instead of 5, which is falsely printed here, was surrendered to the Archduke, and presently after like to be drowned by the sea. English. From the round of a lily shall be born a great prince, soon and late come into his province, Saturn in Libra being in exaltation, the house of Venus in a decreasing strength, a woman afterwards and a male under the bark, to maintain the happy blood of Bourbon. Not. This prophecy was concerning Louis XIII, King of France, son of Henry IV, who is born under the sign of Libra, and therefore called the just, the rest is easy. English. He that the principality shall keep by great cruelty, at last shall see a great army, by a fire blow most dangerous, he should do better by agreement. Other ways he shall drink juice of orange. Not. This is concerning a governor of the Principality of Orange, under the authority of a prince, which governor having been long in possession of that government, and the prince being bussy in the wars of the Netherlands, the said governor Pladrex in his absence, so that the prince was forced to have him made away privately. English. When the treacherous plot of Robin shall put many lords and a great prince in trouble, being known by Laughing, his head shall be cut off, the feather in the wind, friend to Spain, post overtaken in the Countray, and the scrivener shall cast himself into the water. Not. 2 notable histories are contained in this stanza, the first is of the Marshal of Biron, the second is of Nicholas, High Secretary to the Lord Villeroy, who himself was Chief Secretary of State to Henry IV. And because they are curious ones, and not to be met everywhere, we shall set them down. The first 4 verses are concerning the Duke of Biron, who by transposition of letters is called here Robin. This man by his military valor and experience, had from a private gentleman ascended to the highest degrees of honor and preferment that his condition was capable of, for though he were not 40 years old, he had attained unto the greatest dignities of the kingdom, being 14 years old, he was made colonel of the Switzers in Flanders, a little while after he was made marshal of camp, and after marshal general, he was admitted admiral of France in the Parliament of Tours, and then mareschal of France in that of Paris. At the siege of Amiens he was sole lieutenant of his majesty, though there were many princes of the blood in the army, and to complete his greatness, he was made peer of France, and the barony of Biron erected into a dukedom. Not contented with all that, he said, he would not go to the retaking of the rest of the towns in Picardy, unless his statue were erected in brass before the Louvre, and in conclusion, that he had rather die upon a scaffold, undertaking some great matters, than to live idle in his own house. And always among these bravadoes, he did mix some bold and dangerous words, which he would have every body to approve of. When he saw that after the siege of Amiens the war was at an end, that Brittany was reduced, and that all the swords were sheathed for a good while, he thought that having no more occasion to exercise his valor, he should grow out of credit, and that he should have no more that power, by which he pleased the king and do without fear all what he did without justice. The fire of that great courage, finding no work without, began to work within. That burning desire of being always the first did fill his head with flames and smoke of a great design. He complained of the king, and of the unequal reward of his deserts and services, did publish his discontents, adding threatenings to his complaints, and spoke of the king with little respect, that his most intimate friends did judge his words insolent and dangerous. It is true it was the vice of his nature, but there were also some of fortune, for finding himself filled with all the prosperities that a moderate man might wish for in his condition, he found that men lose themselves by too much happiness. He began then to lend his ears unto flatterers, and when they told him that he was the greatest captain in France, he answered that he would die upon a scaffold, or he would go beyond the condition of a single gentleman, that the goodness of his sword should give him what fortune had denied, and the astrologers, to whom he gave great credit, had foretold him in ambiguous terms that nothing could hinder him from being a sovereign, but the blow of a sword given by a Burgundian, and though all his lifetime he had shewed but little devotion and zeal to religion, yet from that time that he prepared his soul to the motion of his ambition, he feigned himself very devout and zealous, and began to wear beads, that the Baron of Lux had given him in a tennis court, and to declare himself an irreconcilable enemy to the Protestants, seeking everywhere some discontented spirits, whom he did encourage with the hopes of a profitable change. Lanacle, lord of Lauphine, was then, for the troubles of Provence, and for the quarrel he had with Lesdiguières, retired into his house, threatened of ill usage by the king, enemy to some great ones, loaded with debts and suits in law. The discontented meet always either by design or by chance. The Duke of Byron, who knew that he had been deeply engaged in the business of the late Duke of Alençon, that he had negotiated with the ministers of the King of Spain and of the Duke of Savoy during the siege of Amiens, that he was full of discontents, thought that such a one was seeking for a master. They spoke together and mixed their grievances, propounding to seek out of the kingdom what they could not find within, and to contract an intelligence with the Duke of Savoy. Thus, after so many examples of unavoidable dangers, the Duke of Byron did venture upon a journey full of rocks and shelves, under the conduct of one who was yet wet with the shipwreck he had lately made. The Duke went into Flanders, for the execution of the Treaty of Vervins, where one Pico of Orleans spoke to him, and inspired into him strange desires of raising his fortune, with those that knew and admired his defects. The Duke of Byron did hearken to him, and told him he would be glad to hear him some other time upon that subject. From that time forwards the Spaniards thought themselves sure of him, and grew confident either to have him, or to destroy him. A French gentleman, who because of the civil wars was retired into Flanders, and had some employment in the Archduke's court, gave the first intelligence of it to the king, who took it kindly, but sent him word, that the Duke of Byron had too much courage and honesty to harbour such a wickedness. Being come back again from Flanders, the king wished him to marry, but he shewed that his inclinations tended to some other party than that which was offered unto him, and though he made shew to court the daughter of my Lady Luce, he nevertheless intended to have the natural sister of the Duke of Savoy, of which the knight Breton had spoken to him. Lauphine had in charge from the Duke of Byron to do all what he could for his satisfaction. Pico had made a journey into Spain, only to know and receive the propositions. Farges, a monk of the order of Fisto, went into Savoy, and from thence to Milan to receive orders how to pluck of this plant out of France. Things went very slowly, for the Spaniards do not easily believe the words of the French, unless they be with great effects of rebellion and change, but the Duke of Savoy being at Paris, did wholly put out the flower de luces he had in his heart, and did dispose him to disturb the king so much at home, that he should have but little time to dispute him the marquedom of Silices. Upon that hope the Duke of Savoy neglected the execution of the treaty of peace made at Paris. The war was proclaimed, and the Duke of Byron took the chief places in Bresse. Being at Pierre Chastet in the beginning of September, Lauphine came to him, and by his order made 2 journeys to St. Claude, where Roncas was. The king had notice of it, but thought it better to dissemble it than to surprise a man he loved in his infidelity. He thought enough to bid him come into Savoy, and to rid himself of Lauphine. He did believe that what the king said to him out of his affection proceeded from fear, and kept company still with Lauphine, and never went to see the king, but with great many attendants, refusing to take his lodging near his, that he might have more liberty. He persuaded the king, being at Annecy, that he did desire to discover some passages, and therefore desired to have some guides of the country, but it was to send safely Rennes, Lauphine's secretary, to the Duke of Savoy, to give him intelligence in what state the king's army was, and to bid d'Albigny retreat, who otherwise had been defeated. This was about the time that the Duke of Byron did entreat the king to bestow the government of the citadel of Bourg on him, whom he should name. It is the nature of the great ones that serve princes to believe they deserve all, and to become more dangerous than enemies if they are refused what they ask for. The king did declare that he would bestow the place upon de Boisses. This denial did so trouble the mind of the Duke of Byron, and put him upon such a strange and diabolical resolutions, that he resolved one morning, being yet in his bed at Chaumont, to kill the king, as it is expressed in the depositions of La Fin and Rennes, but this took no effect. Himself afterwards did abhor the thought of it. La Fin also went from the army to conclude the bargain with the Duke of Savoy and the Earl of Fuentes. He treated first with the Duke of the Spanish ambassador at Uray, afterwards at Thurin with Roncas, where also came Pico, bringing the answers of the Council of Spain, upon the propositions of the Duke of Byron, with order to confer with La Fin, and to persuade him to make a journey into Spain. He said plainly that the King of Spain was resolved to have the Duke of Byron at any rate. The Duke of Savoy and the Earl of Fuentes appointed a day to be at some with La Fin and Pico, though the minds of every one were clearly expressed and understood. La Fin, who was acquainted with all his secret counsels, told the king that the marriage of the third daughter of the Duke of Savoy was the fodder and cement of all the treaty, with a promise of 500,000 crowns and all the rights of sovereignty in Burgundy. While La Fin treated in Italy the capitulation of the Duke of Byron, the treaty of peace was concluded at Lyons. The Duke of Byron had been always against this peace. When he saw that it was concluded, and that the king had heard something of his dealings with La Fin, he feigned to be very penitent of it, and asked the king forgiveness in the cloister of the Franciscan friars at Lyons, and entreated him most humbly to forgive the evil intentions that the denial of the citadel of Bourg had put into his mind. The king did forgive him, and told him that he was glad he had trusted to his clemency, and in the affection he bore to him, of which he would always give him such tokens, that he should never have occasion to doubt of it. Leaving the king, he met with the Duke of Espernon, and told him that he would impart unto him as unto his best friend, the best fortune that ever he had in his life, which was, that he had discharged his conscience to the king, and that he had forgiven him all what was past. The Duke of Espernon told him that he was glad of it, but that it was necessary he should have his pardon in writing, for such faults could not be so easily blotted out. "What," said he, "upon what can I rely better than upon the king's word? If the Duke of Byron wanteth an abolition, what shall others do?" So they parted, one thinking that his lion's courage ought not to be used so meanly, the other wiser, remembering that a lion is never so well tamed, but one time or another he will prove still a lion, and at last biteth the hand of him that hath wronged him so fiercely, that he is for ever avenged of him. The Duke of Espernon had reason to advise him to take an abolition in writing, and the Duke of Byron was not too blamed to trust to the king's word, who certainly would have forgiven that fault, if he had done nothing since to renew the memory of it. But here is once more to be observed a passage that containeth all the signs of an implacable spirit. The Duke of Byron being sent for by the king to receive his commands, and the effects of his clemency, went from Bourg, and came to lie at Vimy. From thence he wrote a letter to La Fin that was at Milan, and then went to Lyons, where he was received by the king as the prodigal son. He stayed some time at Lyons, and went to Vimy again, from whence he wrote another letter to La Fin by Farges. As soon as he came to Bourg, he sent to Bosco, cousin of Roncas, to advance the business. This negotiation did continue at some between the Duke of Savoy, the Earl of Fuentes, and La Fin. The Earl of Fuentes carried La Fin to Milan, and being desirous to be better informed upon some points, and finding La Fin not so firm in his answers, he thought it not good to trust him wholly with the secret, and resolved to rid himself of him. Therefore he sent him back, and entreated him to see the Duke of Savoy in his way. He had the good fortune to go by the way of the Graysons, and so through Ball, Perentru, and Besancon, for Rennes' secretary, that went through Savoy, was there arrested and made prisoner. The work nevertheless went on. Alphonsus, Casal, and Roncas did continue it with the Baron of Lux, and in the meantime the Duke of Byron played his part, having sent an express into Spain, though he were then with the king, who, loath to lose him, kept him near, carried him to see the frontier towns, and sent him ambassador into England, where he saw the head of the Earl of Essex, A late example of justice upon those who will be feared by their masters, and abuse their favor. At his return he made a journey into Gascony, where he was visited and honored by the nobility of the Count Ray as a prince, and being come to Dijon, he went into Switzerland to make an end of the renewing of the alliance between the king and the Switzers, where he continued still his practices with the Earl of Fuentes, to whom he sent his secretary, under pretence to send his pages into the garrisons of Palma, for the Venetians.